Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm McLaughlin. Thanks a lot for having me here this afternoon. I appreciate your time. I'll got about 20 minutes or so, and I was going to talk today about where do we go from here in cybersecurity, if we can get these slides going here. Nope. There we go. Yeah, and the reason I titled the talk this was clearly I think we have a ton of attention on us from a security perspective, right? On a global basis, everybody's talking about this. So the question I think for all of us would be, what do we do with all that? Right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about some organizing principles around this that may help us as we go through, I don't know, the million details that we all have to work through as a society, right? And the highest level point in this was, is this going away and why does it matter? And I'll start with that of like, what time is it, right? So today I think it's the digital age and time. Everything that we're doing as a society, commercial or personal, is based more and more on digital technology, like driverless cars, for example, and other things that are very prevalent in our society today. And I think that's going to do nothing except continue into the future, right? And when you have an age that's all based on digital technology, the really good part of that is massive productivity gains. Right? So a lot of times you're going to hear, or you have heard, the times we live in right now called the fourth industrial age, right? And the reason for that is in all of the, quote, industrial ages, there's been massive increases in productivity for society over time. The difference on this one is the amount of productivity gains that have occurred in the last 40 years or so are more than all the other industrial revolutions stacked up that took hundreds and hundreds of years. Right? So when you have a digital age driving massive productivity, the concern from a security perspective is naturally, or maybe it's obvious, right, is that there's a really thin line between productivity and chaos when you are in a digital age, right? So you've got all these technologies that are driving tons of productivity, but we're always an inch away from just massive chaos because the systems that underlie all the productivity gains are exactly the systems that are going to underlie all the chaos, right? When you have all these consistent and increasing breaches and breaches and violations of trust, right? So at a very high level, I think part of the problem for us all is that when you have a society built on this basis, and we're all hoping, we're assuming as global society that we're going to have big GDP gains in the future, we have to have that population explosion point of view, this has to work. So every time we see another attack, we see another breach, there's just more bleeding of trust about, well, is it actually going to work, right? And there's a very large concern, as I think there should be, is if people just don't trust stuff anymore, they're not going to use it, right? If they don't use it, we're going to have these massive productivity declines, and that's going to be a huge problem. And it's something that I think has been taken very seriously across the world, including here in DC with Jim Clapper coming out not too long ago saying, cybersecurity is the #1 threat for the United States in the future, right? Didn't say it was anything else. There's lots of other threats, but the #1 threat, that's kind of an interesting statement, right? And the reason for that is the whole society, U.S. society and economy, is built on these digital technologies. So you certainly have the government saying that. We have every board in the world talking about it. I get to talk to lots of boards of directors on a global basis, top 3 every time, right? Many boards, over 65%, based on the last study I saw, have standing committees now for security, just like they have audit, comp, and nom-gov. Now they have cyber boards or security boards or safety and security boards, right? So being taken very seriously because these companies know themselves that their whole lifeline, brand reputation for sure, is built on the trust that those companies have, and you're not going to maintain that trust if they don't have the security to back it up. And the underlying reason for this, again, is these tectonic shifts in technology are driving all those productivity gains, whether it's SaaS or cloud or virtualization or mobility. I make sure I call it mobile. The last guy got dinged on that, right? Mobile security, important. But all these tectonic shifts are driving all the productivity gains for us in society, but they're all, in essence, digital in nature, right? So the very thing that drives all the productivity is the very thing that's going to take it down, or could, over time, and destroy that fine line between productivity and chaos, right? And just like security is a wonderful business to be in, it's going to change. There's new challenges all the time. Here's some of them that are coming for sure down the pike right now, right? We think it's hard already. Now we have all the physical assets and cyber assets blending in nature, right? I think in the next 2 to 3 years' time, some of the most pressing conversations we're going to have as a society and businesses and governments is going to be IT to OT, SCADA, ICT environments, things along those nature. As screwed up as we know all the IT infrastructure is from a cyber perspective today, it's fantastic compared to SCADA systems, right, and ICT systems. And you know what? Those things are controlled a lot of times or can be influenced by IT systems, right? So the blending of cyber and physical is going to create a lot more challenges for us that already exist. We're just discovering them now, saying, well, I got a real problem here, right? The second thing is we continue for productivity enhancement reasons and ROI reasons to aggregate data massively, and we make it readily available, right, which has a lot of value in it. Think of the cloud or things along those lines. Lots of value in that, right? But from a cyber criminal perspective, it's a big thank you. I appreciate you putting all that stuff together for me, you know, in one place or a few places. So that's going to drive lots of cybersecurity challenges for us in the future as to how do we guard those productivity gains. And the third point, which is probably the most fundamental point, I think, today and will be into the future, and is also the baseline for that everything that's come before, is for all intent and purposes, compute power today is limitless. Right? That's a bit of an overstatement, but limitless and cheap, right? And that is not going to stop. So the more compute power that's available and the lower the cost is for that has enormous implications, not only for productivity enhancement, but also from a security perspective. And that's why, when we're talking about cyber, this is one of those things that comes along every once in a while that's going to be around for a very, very, very long time. It's not going away, ever. We don't fix this, right, ever, where we say, nah, we used to talk about that. This is something what we have to do is contain it. We have to contain it in a way that the risk of that productivity versus chaos is such that we can move on with our lives and contain the threat and contain the risk, but it's always going to be with us into the future for a long, 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 long time. Right? Now, I'm an optimist by nature. I'm actually optimistic that we're going to get to the point to be able to contain this in a lot of ways, but it's going to take decades. It's not going to take years of time, right? So where we want to get to, I think, as a society, is we're not doing this. We're not having a conference on cybersecurity every other day of the week that we're all going to, right? Because it doesn't mean the security issues are going to go away. It means we figured it out as a way to internalize it as a society and mitigate the risks such that we can contain it and move on with our lives. So when you have something that important, it's a big deal. It cuts to the very heart of society. Our entire GDP growth, if not other things, depend on it. It's really important to understand what you're trying to accomplish, so our ideas matter. Very seldom in life, in my experience, you get somewhere if you don't know where you're going in the first place, right? So ideas really matter from a setup perspective around organizing principles around where do we go from here? Where do we put all this time and attention that we're all putting into this, right? And the ideas that I like to talk about is really about math, right? And the first point on this is prevention orientation. Right? And what I mean by that is not prevention, 100% prevention. I mean prevention orientation. And the reason that this is so important is, in essence, I think we're fighting a math battle. And if we're fighting a math battle where the adversary is very, very automated, and our response to that is increasingly manual in nature, we're mathematically dead. It's just a matter of time. Right, so the first thing is a prevention orientation, and realizing that prevention in itself, orientation, is a math problem. The speakers before me talked a bit about the attack lifecycle, for example. So the idea of, can you interdict an attack on its path to become a successful attack? And can you do something about that before it's reached the end of its life cycle and it's become a successful attack? If you could, you would actually be doing high degrees of prevention. If you can't do that, and it is a successful attack, and there will be successful attacks, can you figure it out fast enough that you can immunize vast majority of the rest of society before they get hit, right? Because then you'd be doing high degrees of prevention. And underlying this whole concept is the idea of math and economics. Right? Today, as it has been in the past and will be into the future, I said compute power is basically limitless. It's also really cheap, right? The cost of compute power has continued to go down over time. I think we should expect that the cost of compute power is going to continue to go down for as far as we can see into the future. The primary beneficiary of that, from a cyber perspective, has been the adversary. Right? They get to launch more and more attacks and more sophisticated attacks for less and less cost. And by cost, I don't just mean financial cost, dollars and cents, I mean personal cost as well. If very little cost, you don't get your assets frozen, you're unlikely to go to jail, all the things in a personal cost. But even just from an economic perspective, it actually doesn't cost a lot to be in the cybercrime business, right? And that could be, I know there's other types of actors as well, but the prevalent and most predominant form of attack today is cyber criminals, right? So as long as the cost of compute power goes down, this is what the curve looks like, right? The cost of launching a successful attack goes down, which means the number of successful attacks is going to go up over time. And we're all facing that today in our environments of if you drew a slope of the curve of attacks, it's really high, right? Nobody's bringing that down. Nobody, right? So the trick is, how do we bring down the number of successful attacks, right? So basically, how can we flip this on its head, right? This cost curve on its head and say, can we drive up the cost of a successful attack? Not drive up the cost of an attack, that would be nice, but drive up the cost of a successful attack to the point where some economics start to take over and say, it's hard, it's very expensive, you have to aggregate finite resources, the bad guys don't have all the resources in the world either. Can we do that and do it effectively and very consistently so we can try to get some leverage into this math equation, right? Now, when I'm running around talking to customers, prospects, they could be in government, they could be in business, they could be schools, it doesn't really matter. They're saying this, right? But here's what they say. They say 5 things. The first thing they say is, I really need better security than I have today, right? And when you drill into that and say, what do you actually mean by that, right? What they're saying is, I actually need high degrees of prevention. That's what I want, right? I don't want stuff to work, meaning I want the attacks to work. I want high degrees of prevention. And when I get that, I hope, I would like to have vastly reduced complexity in my enterprise or my network, right? Because we know for sure, it's a truism, that complexity is not the friend of security. Simplicity is, right? So I want better security. I want less complexity in the process from that. I would like to see in the course of that I get a lot better productivity and better total cost of ownership. And what they mean by that is, from a productivity perspective, is the least leverageable resource I have is people, right? I need my people to work on very productive things from a security perspective, not play whack-a-mole all day long, right? So I need them to be way more productive, and I really need better value from every dollar I spend. No, I haven't heard people say I want to spend less on security. I'm sure they would like to, by the way, right? But that's not what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is just saying I need better value from what I'm spending. So I want better security, I want less complexity, I expect to get better productivity and total cost of ownership in the process. I need to be able to measure that, right? I need to be able to go up, down, sideways in my organization and talk about the measurability of what I've actually accomplished so that people can make this tangible. Otherwise, people don't really know what I do for them, right? Whether I'm a CISO, CIO, CTO, or somebody on the SOC or threat intel team. And then I need it to be very consistent, right? I need those measurable results, and they need to be highly consistent all the time, right? So that I can get a track record of, if you give me $1 for something, this is what you get in return from a security perspective. Better security, less complexity, better total cost of ownership that I can measure for you inside and outside, and I'm very consistent along that, right? So I think, how do you get that, right? So the 3 organizing principles that I'd like to discuss very briefly with you would be these 3. The first is prevention technology. So I talked about having a prevention orientation, right? So the first organizing principle would be around prevention technology and encouraging everybody to lean very hard on everybody who's a vendor to them, whether they're a technology provider or service provider, to say, yeah, I need to do something, right? Give me some better prevention than you're doing today, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The second thing is threat sharing. We'll all talk about it. Public-private, private-private, public-public, right? threat sharing. So I'd like to give a couple quick thoughts about that, because those are all good ideas, but we need some organizing principles. And the third is continual education and training. So I'll do each of these briefly. On the prevention orientation side, from a technology perspective, there is a paradigm shift that's happening in front of us today, right? And that paradigm shift is this, which is a move that's gathering steam very quickly away from legacy technologies that usually are delivered as point solutions that primarily do detection and tell you you might have a problem, none of which work together. They're never designed to work together. They usually come from different vendors, and there's no pre-integration of that. Right? These lead to highly manual responses, reactive responses that are very people intensive. Now, I said earlier, the least leverageable resource that we're ever going to have is people. So if we're going to take an approach that looks like this, which we have for 25 years, right? In essence, we're trying to stack up people against a highly automated adversary, and mathematically, you're dead already. It's just a matter of time. Right? So the paradigm shift that is occurring, it has to occur, is where it looks like this, which is saying, I need next generation technologies. And what I mean by next generation technologies are ones that are designed actually to try to get leverage, to try to find that interdiction capability inside the attack lifecycle. I want them delivered in a platform. Everybody uses the term platform, but in this case, what I mean by that is things that were actually designed natively to work together. So they're highly automated, highly communicated, and they actually do things together before you take it out of the box. When you turn it on, right, it works that way, right? Whether it's software or hardware. And the third thing is that it's proactive in nature. It's prevention-oriented and proactive in nature, right? So that you don't have to be the back-end integrator of a bunch of point technologies that the best they're going to do is try to tell you, you might have a problem, right? So a prevention orientation from a technology perspective, that's happening, right? When this happens, it's very important that it be very consistent. I talked about consistency before, and here what I mean by consistent is that security capability, the high degrees of prevention in a very automated way that gets you a lot of leverage, has to be exactly the same no matter where your data is. Right? Talking about topography today is a problem. Talking about data is what we should be talking about. So when I give you that security, whoever says that to you, if I'm going to give you that security, ideally it would be exactly the same whether my data is on an endpoint, in a perimeter, my data center, NSX, AWS, Azure, Dropbox, Salesforce.com, doesn't matter. Same thing. Right? A standard to hold people by. Can you give me exactly the same thing? Because when data is moving around like this and it's going to move into the future, I talked about those challenges that are going to face us. If we already have complexity, I got 27 different vendors' devices in my network, I got 19 agents on my endpoint. Now let's make it even more complex and say, oh, and I have to use different vendor everywhere, wherever my data is. That's senseless. Right? So consistency is going to be extraordinarily important. The second thing, organizing principle, is threat sharing. Talk about threat sharing all the time. Right? Super important, has to happen. But I would argue that from a threat sharing perspective, if it's not, whatever you're doing, is not designed to deliver these three things, I'll just pop them all up here, right? So it's build out these three things, then they're not focused on the right thing. It's a resource misallocation. The first thing would be, from a threat sharing perspective, is that all known threats are known by everybody all the time. The second thing would be that if there's an unknown threat, I can take that unknown threat and turn it into a known threat really fast. And the third thing is I can take all those known threats and all those unknown threats, and I can automatically reprogram my infrastructure to be updated automatically in the absence of manual input, right? That requires the ability to generate all these things. It requires the ability to share them in machine-readable format, and it requires the ability to ingest them from a machine-readable perspective and have consistently all of your infrastructure with very, very little manual intervention updated. Because if we can do that, we're a long way to prevention, right? So if you can stop something in the first place, stop it. If you can't, and somebody's patient zero, immunize everybody else, right? So from a threat sharing perspective, having these three organizing principles, I think would be good things to measure all the activities against, to say, are we doing something that's associated with any of these? But ideally, all three of these. Now, from a security perspective, one quick call out I would like to talk about is the Cyber Threat Alliance, which we founded a few years ago, along with some of our competitor partners. Symantec, McAfee, Fortinet, and ourselves, right? And now we have about 10 vendors in here. So the idea behind the Cyber Threat Alliance was almost every industry in the world today, when it comes to cyber, has agreed to work together because it's so important. So they rise above the competitive juices, right? And they work together, whether it's ISACs or ISALs or things along those lines, except for the security industry, which actually knows a lot of stuff. If we all work together, we actually know quite a bit, right? So the idea behind the Cyber Threat Alliance is to move the competitive playing field for the cyber industry from what do we know to what can we do with what we know, right? And so this is real. It's been organized about 2 years ago, stood up over a year ago. And what I mean by that is these servers stood up in all these organizations, sharing information with sticks and taxi, machine-readable formats of things that are not in VirusTotal. So it's top shelf, not the common stuff, top shelf stuff. So we can share them amongst each other for the good of all of our customers. Now, what we can do with it depends on what our platforms look like and how fast we can ingest it and propagate it out there in order to automatically provide all those updates across that consistent infrastructure, right? So a move to just change how we compete in the security industry, and my little commercial in this is, if you are a customer of security companies and they're not part of it, ask them why. They don't have a good answer, right? So this is something that should be good for everybody to join. And the last point I'll mention around this is education and jobs. So I said prevention-oriented technologies, threat intelligence sharing, and education jobs. You can have, as somebody just said, the best technology in the world. You could share all the information, and people are still going to do stupid things, right, as users. So we have a 100% requirement that if you're in charge of somebody, your kids, your employees, citizens, whatever, right, you have a position of authority, that we have cyber education constantly, right, all the time. Not the once a year you have to go take a module sort of test, right, all the time, because there is a personal level of responsibility around cyber hygiene that folks need to be taught. And until we do that very consistently and raise the bar, our best efforts at technology and other things are going to fall short or at least be a lot harder. And associated with that is jobs. I mentioned that the least leverageable resource we have are people, and trained people. We got to do a lot to fix that. People in themselves are not the answer here, right? But they are part of the answer, the wet work part of the answer, right? But from an education perspective and a training perspective, getting as involved as possible in educating and training people for cyber-related jobs. Two things I'll note here we're very proud of. One is the picture on the up top there is the permanent exhibit we sponsored at the San Jose Tech Museum, which has won many awards now, including from the White House, on educating kids ages 7 to 19 from a cyber perspective on things like people actually do want your information and here's how they're going to take it from you. The basics of cryptography to get them interested in this industry for career things in the future, all the way down to actually, you can't see it on this picture, but storefront setup where somebody's the attacker in a van outside and somebody plays defense to get some sense about how this stuff actually works, right? And then from a jobs perspective, working with lots of veteran organizations who is a great source of talent, super talented people, very dedicated, motivated, who want to be in the cyber field. And if anybody would like to talk about what Palo Alto Networks plus other companies is doing to join efforts, we'd be happy to do that after that. So those are the 3 steps forward. Push for prevention, threat intelligence sharing defined the way I just said, and the third is education and jobs. And I would leave you with trying to keep these things in mind as organizing principles for the future of the digital age. And I am out of time. Thank you very much for your attention this afternoon.